It is Thursday, May the 10th, or as my Nevada basketball fans might like to say, Jordan Brown Eve. The five stars commitment will come tomorrow. We have learned through Andrew Slater of the Fieldhouse over at the Athletic, reporting that the top remaining player in the class is preparing to make his commitment tomorrow. Nevada seen as the favorite. Cal, Arizona also in the mix. So I'm certainly not doing quite as well as Nevada fans might be tomorrow afternoon, Brad, but I'm doing pretty good. I'm always excited to sit down, talk some college basketball with you, and take a break from the dog eat dog world that is college life, and talk about some hoops. How's it going, my man?
It's going great. I mean, it's always super fun to talk with you about college hoops, even in the off season. It actually might even be more fun in the off season. We can go in millions of different directions, and we can start our focus on this Nevada roster, which is intriguing and confusing to say the least.
Yes, I'll kind of run down the roster situation, the scholarship situation here for those of you who haven't paid as close attention. I wouldn't expect any of you to, other than the Wolfpack fans who I know do listen on a frequent basis. Currently, Nevada is one over the scholarship limit. They have 14 scholarships allotted for next season. They just received a commitment a couple of days ago from Ehab Amin, one of the top grad transfers available. Kind of attacking combo guard who can do a lot defensively as well. A really good get. It was a surprising get to me, given the lack of a path to playing time. So yeah, as I said, 14 scholarships without the potential for Jordan Brown. Jordan Brown would push them to 15, which would be 2 over the limit. They do have 3 players: Cody Martin, Caleb Martin, and of course Jordan Caroline, all exploring the NBA draft process. They have another grad transfer committed in Trey Porter, who we've touched on this podcast, and they have several transfers who sat out this past season who will be able to play next year. Jazz Johnson from Portland, Nizri Zuzua from Bryant, Trey Sean Thurman from Nebraska Omaha, Corey Henson from Wagner, and potentially Marcel Petway. There's been some rumblings whether he'd ever make it to campus. We don't know that. They also have 2 freshmen signed, LOIs, Vincent Lee and KJ Himes, 2 big guys. If everyone comes back, this roster's loaded, Brad, and Brown certainly would be the kind of icing on the cake, a 6'10" forward who can do it all. He can shoot the 3. He can protect the rim. Nevada's been on him for about 3 years now. I saw a tweet today. And so for it all to come down to this, committing before he visits Arizona, who is seen as kind of a late front runner in this, seems like very good news for the Wolfpack. But what are you thinking here with Jordan Brown? Do you think he does choose the pack like most expect, or does he go in a different way?
So, I mean, I think at this point you have to go Nevada. I mean, Arizona also kind of has a kind of full front court at this point, where they have Chase Jeter, who I expect to be one of the more forgotten transfers out there, former 5-star who sat out this year. And they added a grad transfer with Ryan Luther from Pitt, who can play the 4 and the 5. So there's not a ton of available playing time there. He would play a lot at Cal, but Cal is definitely in the midst of a rebuild still. So I think Nevada is the front runner, and I think that also means that I think Cody and Caleb Martin are 100% gone. I would be absolutely shocked to see them back. Between the commitments that you had mentioned about Ehab Amin, that was the one that I think ended any speculation of them coming back. And I think adding Jordan Brown also kind of intensifies the speculation that Jordan Caroline might not come back, because if you lose Caroline, then the 3 players of Trayshawn Turman, Trey Porter, and Jordan Brown can split the 4 and the 5 pretty with enough minutes going to each player, and then the backcourt will work itself out. A few different scoring guards, and we'll see if Lindsey Drew is back healthy. He hurt his Achilles, I think, toward the end of the year. So I think a lot of people are going with the Nevada looks like a top 5 team on paper. I don't think that you can say that, because I think the Martin twins are out of here.
It's certainly going to be interesting, and that's the biggest question we face, especially if Brown does choose the pack as we kind of expect, is do the Martins come back? I had kind of assumed when I saw the Amin commitment that it meant they were gone, but I have talked to a good source out in Reno. There is, they still believe, that staff believes that the Martins will be back. Obviously, there's a chance that they could change their mind. Obviously, they could be wow someone in a workout and they could leave. But there is certainly a path in which these two do return. That Jordan Caroline does return. I know the Martins and Caroline were instrumental in recruiting Amin. So I mean, you can take that for what you will. It certainly wouldn't be foreign for them to then decide to commit elsewhere, or go pro, for instance. But I think there's probably a 50-50 shot they come back, maybe even 60-40, just from what I've been hearing. I don't know that it makes sense. My guy out in Reno, actually, he messaged me after the Amin commitment. He's like, I don't understand how we're getting these kids, but I'm not going to complain. So we're going to have to kind of just see what happens there. If they were to get Brown and bring everyone back, they would be 2 over the scholarship limit, as I have said. It's going to be difficult to find those 2 openings. My guess is 1 or 2 of those freshman letter of intents, somehow a kid doesn't wind up coming for whatever reason, whether it's academic or if it's a situation if the kid wants to look elsewhere, or unfortunately Nevada tries to look elsewhere and lets him out of that LOI. I heard a rumor that maybe you could get Lindsey Drew off scholarship for the year for whatever reason, whether it's because of the Achilles and his health concerns, or it could be that he is playing next year, but his family does have some money. His father's, I believe, an associate head coach in the NBA, so he could afford it. That was one possibility that was kind of thrown at me. Obviously, maybe one of the transfers who's sitting out doesn't make it. Maybe Jalen Harris, who was not going to enroll until I believe the summer or fall. The transfer from Louisiana Tech doesn't end up making it. He enters the transfer market. So there is a path in which they find the space for all these guys. My bigger question, Brad, is, if they were, let's just kind of play this game of the Martins are back, Caroline's back, Jordan Brown's there. Everyone is back of note other than, let's just cut off the 2 freshmen from consideration because I don't think they would really factor in the rotation for playing time anyway. How does Eric Musselman handle this rotation? Because I'm starting to feel this kind of USC from this year vibe. There's so much talent. How does it all fit together? Obviously, USC had some issues with DeAnthony Melton's, and that hurt the chemistry. But how does this fit together? I simply don't see Eric Musselman just cutting the Martin twins' minutes to 22 and just playing his bench. I mean, somebody's not going to be happy, whether it's Johnson or Zuzua, Corey Henson. Those guys in the backcourt aren't going to play as many minutes as they expected. A guy like Trayshawn Thurman, who probably expected to come in and start, now looks to be a backup at best. How do you see this whole thing transpire if Nevada can put these pieces all together?
Yeah, so you can send me to freezing cold takes if you want, but there is a 0% chance that the Martin twins come back. But to play along with the hypothetical, I think the starting lineup would be Drew if healthy, and then Caleb, Cody, Caroline, and I think I'll go with the senior Trey Porter, meaning that Jordan Brown would be the 6th man, probably one of the best 6 men in the country at that point. And then Josh Hall, 7. And then you have Ehab Amin, 8. And then one of Johnson then one player out of Johnson, Henson, Zuzua is the 9th man. And that's your 9-man rotation. But I mean, I would be absolutely shocked if the Martin twins leave. I also wanted to mention too, I've seen a lot of Nevada fans, already projecting their rotations with Brown in, and it reminded me like right before the championship game when I put out my first top 25, I had 2 Vanderbilt fans ask me how did I leave Vanderbilt out of the top 25 when they had 3 top 10 recruits coming in? And spoiler alert, they do not have 3 because Romeo Langford is going to Indiana.
Yeah, no, that was not an ideal one. I think your lineup's probably right. I could see them kind of go to this look of especially if Drew isn't 100% healthy, where you play him off the bench and you play Cody Martin, who did a lot of distribution, especially in Drew's absence. You play Cody at the 1, Caleb at the 2. Jordan Caroline gets some experience at the 3, at hopefully improving his three-point shot a little bit, because he's a guy who they really like, and if he wants to play in the NBA, I don't think he can be a 4 at 6'7" generously. He could play the 3. Brown could then play the 4, his natural spot, and Trey Porter the 5. And then you could go small and go Caroline all the way up at the 5 and play guys like Amin, guys like Zizua, guys like Henson, Josh Hall, Lindsey Drew in that mix. You could go big with that starting lineup. They just have so many options. I mean, it's gotten to the point Eric Musselman is recruiting so well. He got a kid yesterday to commit who had committable D1 offers, to just walk on to the team. They're gonna have like 5 or 6 walk-ons on the team next year. They went from a team that literally had to grab football players to have enough practice players at the end of last season to literally having a roster of like 20 dudes. And it's absolutely unbelievable what he's done. And with that program, just kind of going to take a minute here to just pat Eric Musselman on the back, because 4 years ago today, basically 3 years ago, really today, Eric Musselman had a roster that was, 4 years, excuse me. He inherited a program that went 9-22 the previous year, had been under 500 3 straight years, 4 of the previous 5, and he has put them into in that short time a Sweet 16, has brought in Power 5 talent, is on the verge of landing a 5-star, has simply dominated the transfer market to the point where it's not even funny. I mean, Trey Porter had every big school wanted him. Ehab Amin literally probably turned down 15 minutes a game in playing time at the very minimum to choose Nevada over choosing Wichita State, where he could have played a ton right away. He's just remarkable in the job that he's done. And I know he'll be a hot name in the coaching circles if and when Steve Alford does lose his job at UCLA, if and when Andy Enfield loses his job potentially over FBI stuff at USC. Pretty much every Pac-12 job that opens will be one for him potentially. Pretty much any job that opens, you're going to hear his name, because if these guys all come back, and I don't know, I think it's a fair bet to say they won't, but the staff certainly thinks there's a good chance, and they're working on the assumption that they will be to a certain degree. It's unbelievable. I mean, just what he's built in such a short amount of time. I really don't remember at a program that's not necessarily a traditional power, literally going from nothing to a legit top 10 team in the span of 4 years. It's remarkable.
So I think it's safe to move on at this point. No, I mean Nevada's gonna be fine either way. Obviously, the ceiling's much higher with the Martin twins back. Wouldn't hold my breath. But moving on to a fellow team in the Mountain West, that's San Diego State, who I think added the single best transfer on the transfer market. That's Malachi Flynn, the point guard from Washington State. Put up really strong numbers as a sophomore for the Cougars last year, and he's a sit one, play 2. He'll be a great replacement for when Devin Watson and Jeremy Hensley graduate this season. He's might not be as valuable as guys like Cremo and Mooney, who can step in and play immediately for the 1 year. But I think with the extra year of eligibility, and I think he's just a better player than those two. I think Flynn is definitely the best transfer, and absolutely a home run hit by the San Diego State staff.
Yeah, I think this entire process has just been really kind of weird. When he announced his transfer, there was obviously that weird article by Washington State's 24/7 page basically calling him out. But that's kind of besides the point. I mean, because he was in the Pac-12, it kind of limited his options, as a West Coast recruit as to where he could go. Creighton was trying to get in there, and San Diego State, as you said, just gets a complete coup. I mean, he's such a talent. Flynn, I think he was legit one of the top 10 best players in the Pac-12 last year. I tweeted he'll be a front runner for Mountain West Player of the Year both years he's there. I fully stand by that still. Obviously, I don't know who will all be there. I mean, you start to build this just really nice core going forward. Flynn will be there, Matt Mitchell, Jalen McDaniels. I'm not entirely sure will be at San Diego State by the time he is eligible. I could see him certainly going pro after next year if he doesn't go pro after this year. But they've got an excellent class coming in this year. Like this is an exciting group of young talent, and Flynn is so talented. And he visited Creighton, but I couldn't believe more big programs weren't involved. Half the Big Ten, half the Big 12 should have been all over this kid. And so his recruitment was certainly very quiet. I know there was talk of Gonzaga pushing, and that never really got too much traction. But for Brian Dutcher to get him, they also went into Georgia, got Agua Garope, a 3-star wing who looks like a pretty nice player. They have the Mensa brothers coming in next year as well in the front court. The future's bright, and Brian Dutcher is kind of picking up where Steve Fisher left off on the recruiting trail.
I think that A-Rop or the wing that they just picked up, I think he was a former Nebraska commit, right?
I believe so. Yeah, I think I read that. Yeah, he was tied to Nebraska for a really long time.
But then the original point I wanted to make was, like, if you look at these other point guards on the sit-out transfer market and where they ended up, I would take Malachi Flynn like 10 times out of 10 over like Marcus Carr, who's going from Pitt to Minnesota, or Davion Mitchell, who's going from Auburn to Baylor. I like both those players as like future prospects, and they're both sit one, play three guys. But I mean, Flynn is just on a different level. Same with like Drew Smith going to Missouri from Evansville. C.J. Walker is probably the second best point guard in that group, going from Florida State to Ohio State. But I think Flynn is the best point guard by far. And I know a lot of people have thrown around like Sasha Cleia-Jones as like the best transfer. I think it has to be either Flynn or Omer Yurtseven, for that top spot.
Yeah, just some stats here on Flynn. Average 15.8 points per game, 4.3 assists, 3.4 rebounds, 2-to-1 assist to turnover ratio. Shot 41% from the field this year, including 52% from two. Pretty impressive finishing. He only shot 34% from three this year, so I guess that might cause a little bit of pause if you're going to have a lead guard who's going to shoot as much as he does. But he definitely could shoot the ball. He shot 85% from the free throw line. He shot 39% from three as a freshman. So I don't think those concerns should have been too much. If nothing else, he could have been used by every team in the country as a sixth-man combo guard, like elite, come off the bench, get buckets guy. Like I don't know a team in the country where he wouldn't play 20 minutes a night. He's just that good. So. Like you said, I really can't understand it. Even a guy like Kobe McEwen, who's more of a scorer, I definitely still take Malachi Flynn over McEwen. He had Marquette, Creighton, Grand Canyon, but he had more interest even than that. He just chose to go to a place where he'd play more. So definitely a steal for San Diego State. And the Mountain West is really loading up. New Mexico's recruiting well. Nevada, as long as Musselman's there, at least, is going to recruit extremely well. Fresno State seems to be in good hands, at least on the recruiting trail. This is going to be a good conference. Leon Rice is a great coach at Boise State. I'm looking forward to watching this conference over the next couple of years because I think it's going to be back to that level that we were hoping to see it.
Okay, next, I kind of wanted to talk about this kind of under the radar story, which has gotten very little coverage, and that's Phil Kofer. So he was one of, if not Florida State's best player this year, and he was a senior, but he wasn't on like the Portsmouth Invitational or the 3-on-3 tournament, any of those rosters. I noticed a few top 25, like two early top 25s had him included on the roster next year. So one of those top 25s was the NBC one done by Rob Doster. So I replied to the tweet literally one month ago and said, "Isn't Phil Kofer out of eligibility?" A Florida State fan just responded to that tweet yesterday saying that Florida State's trying to get a fifth year of eligibility for Phil Kofer because his sophomore year he was injured and he played, I think, 11 games. And if I'm not mistaken, the rule is 10 games. So he needs a waiver to get that fifth year. But if I would not expect him to get the waiver, but if he does get the waiver, I think that vaults Florida State into a consensus top 10 team for next year.
Yeah, I don't think I'd go as far as top 10, but he's a really good player. I think they'd definitely be top 25, probably top 20, maybe even a top 12 to 17 club. I think you're a little higher on Florida State in general than I am, though, especially without like Obiagu. I think that's a kind of an underrated loss that they're going to lose. But Kofor's a valuable kid. I agree. I don't see him getting a waiver. The NCAA isn't particularly accommodating in cases like this. In my experience with the NCAA, the 30% cutoff, which would have been 10 games that season for Florida State. He played in 11. That's real tough. But at the same time, if he can somehow win that waiver, it would be huge, for Florida State, because he was tremendous this season. He kind of can do it all at his size. To be able to score the ball at all three levels, to slash the way he did, averaged 13 points, 5 rebounds, shot 38% from the three, 49% overall from the field. Made some plays defensively as well. I think he's got some NBA type upside if all goes well. Although I wouldn't expect him to get that 5th year. It actually it's kind of tough. He's petitioning for this 5th year and missing out on things like Portsmouth, things like potentially draft combines. I would guess that implies he thinks he's got a good shot. Because, if I'm Phil Kofor, I just had a tremendous year. I'm graduating from Florida State. I'm moving on. And then I'm looking at Portsmouth. And obviously, you don't want to close that door, but it becomes real difficult, when you're missing such big events for a senior to just wait out a waiver that, in my opinion, looks pretty open and shut as a no from the NCAA. So we'll see what happens. The NCAA doesn't necessarily work the quickest in the world, so certainly will be interesting to watch.
Yeah, so I would definitely think a no too, because you make the exception versus 11 versus 10. Then what's it's only 2 more games is 12. You're setting yourself up for a real mess on your hands, similar to what they had with the hardship waivers a few years back. But so I've been tracking these 2 early top 25s and making a composite top 25. I found 17 top 25s, various stages of being updated. Obviously, nothing in terms of the guys who are on the fence of the NBA draft just yet. But in the consensus ranks, Florida State is 17th. Based on the composite average of those 17. I personally do not have Florida State in the top 25, but I think adding that power forward would be so crucial, and kind of he even adds more value to Florida State as a team than his value as a player, just because they really need a power forward. Just looking at their roster right now, it looks like Terrence Mann would be that small ball power forward in the starting lineup. But in terms of why I think that they can be a top 10 team if Kofor's back, Ike Obiagu, he's one of the best transfers on the market. I think losing him for this year isn't a big deal. The future impact of losing him is more of a big deal. But I think Kabengele, who's one of their other centers, outplayed him for most of the season, and in the NCAA tournament was getting most of the minutes. So he's back, and then you also have Kumajay. So you have two pretty quality centers. I think Kabengele is better than Kumajay, but Kumajay can give you some minutes. And they lost CJ Walker, but they replaced him with the grad transfer David Nichols from Albany, who I think should be a fine replacement. He's not as good as CJ Walker, but Trent Forrest is going to see more minutes at that point guard position. Then you have MJ Walker, who had kind of a disappointing year. Still played a role, more of a spot-up shooter role he played last year, but he's a former 5-star who could certainly have a breakout sophomore season. So I think that Kofor would add a lot to this Florida State team.
Yeah, I think we've talked a lot on this podcast throughout throughout the time is guys whose individual statistics don't really estimate their entire impact, especially to one individual situation. I think Kofor is a pretty good example of that. let's transition here to one of the best grad transfers who was on the market, now off the market. That is Joe Cremo, the Albany transfer, headed to the defending national champions of Villanova. I was a little surprised by this decision, Brad. I know he was kind of enamored by Villanova, the opportunity to play in that system, play with Jay Wright. That was something that, you know, from what I had heard, was something that really weighed in his decision. But at the same time, it's kind of another example of a guy taking a little less playing time to take to play at this destination he wants. We saw it with Ehab Amin at Nevada over, say, Wichita State. Cremo seemed kind of cut and dry into a role with maybe a Creighton, even with a school as big as Kansas, where you'd have such a clear role for Villanova. You've got Colin Gillespie in the mix. If Dante DiVincenzo comes back, you're looking at either Gillespie or Javon Quinterly at point guard, Phil Booth at the 2, and DiVincenzo at the 3. And then behind them, you'd have either Gillespie or Quinterly. You'd have Cremo, and then you have Cole Sweeter, who also can play the 3, I believe, as kind of a combo forward. I think he'll play mostly the 3 for Villanova. So kind of the minutes get a little hairy. I think Cremo will, the cream will rise to the top, if you will. No pun intended. Well, pun was intended. I'm sorry. Joe Cremo, he's very talented. I think he'll give them good minutes. In that 20-minute a game shooter off the bench. I think he'll develop in the weight room a lot with Jay Wright and that staff. But it's just a really nice get for the national champions, because Joe's just kind of the perfect grad transfer. He's going to come in, he's going to work his butt off, he's going to shoot the ball for you, he's going to give you some distribution. He's not going to complain. I think it's kind of a perfect fit.
Yeah, I think that this addition signals that DiVincenzo's gone. I mean, there's no way. I mean, I don't know Cremo's total mindset, but I don't think he's going to sign up to be, a 10 to 15 minute a game guy without some sort of assurance that DiVincenzo's gone. And if and when DiVincenzo's gone, I think Cremo slots right in there on the wing, as you mentioned, with Quinterly and Booth on that perimeter rotation. Swider, I think, is going to play some 3 and some 4, just depending on where you think Jermaine Samuels is going to play. So if you think Swider's a 4, Samuels a 3, whatever, vice versa, it's not really too big of a deal. I've also saw that there was at least one rumor on Twitter that Omari Spellman might be gone too, which could move Eric Paschal to play some more 5 like he did 2 seasons ago. They also have Darmir Cosby-Roundtree, who was Spellman's backup this year. He could see more minutes, but maybe Villanova could take a dive into the grad transfer market again, and maybe get like a short-term fix there at center.
Yeah, Spellman's decision is going to be one to watch. I don't think the source that did put that out is overly reputable, but at the same time, I think it's very much possible that he does go pro. Might be someone just jumping the gun, might be a true story. So we'll have to kind of see what happens with Spellman, because we've discussed him on the show quite a bit. We both think he is, all Big East, potentially Big East Player of the Year type of talent. Let's transition to a grad transfer that joined the market since our last show, Tremaine Isabel. He will visit Seton Hall, Xavier, and Arizona State at the very least. A grad transfer from Drexel. Hey, Brad, this is where I really get frustrated with the transfer rule. Tremaine Isabel had 2 kind of troublesome years at Missouri, didn't get too much run, winds up transferring all the way down to Drexel, who takes a chance on a kid from Seattle, 3,000 miles from home, pays for his scholarship for a year, lets him graduate, and in the 1 year he plays, he balls out, gets him 21, 7.5, 3.5 assists, and he's right away gone to the next high major that'll take him. Obviously, we don't want to prevent kids from graduating. I think the grad transfer rule is great. I think it's really important that we have something that is an incentive to graduate and move on. But at the same time, it's really tough for me to feel good about seeing Drexel in the first week of May lose their best player by a long shot when you took a chance when no one else would on this kid. And obviously maybe that's on the kid, and he needs to be more loyal. And I'm not going to call out Tremaine Isabel. I don't know his situation. I don't know if he wants to be closer to home in Seattle, although his list certainly doesn't indicate that. It's just real tough for me to get behind a move like this.
Well, I know that Providence really wanted him out of high school, but he ended up going to Missouri instead. He had a pretty solid reputation. I think he was like a 3-star prospect, like a scoring kind of combo guard. But I mean, people say all the time like, the NCAA has to do what's best for the kids, and what's best for Isabel is getting more exposure, playing that tougher competition at a Seton Hall who desperately needs a point guard at this point, or even a Xavier he will play less, but will still play than kind of wasting away at Drexel, who's a middle of the road CAA program at best. I know stuff for you, being a Siena fan, this could conceivably happen to you down the road with one of your players for Siena, but it just makes too much sense for a guy who's putting up these great numbers at the mid-major level to take that jump if given the opportunity.
Yeah, I guess it's just something that's tough to reconcile with, especially just given the transfer. I don't mind when a guy gives you 3 years and then graduates early and moves on. Like, I think Joe Cremo, graduating and transferring is great, for basketball, that a kid can go out and get his degree and have a good GPA for 3 years, get a degree in 3 years and graduate early and go get to play 1 year at the national champs. To me, that's awesome. And David Nichols did the same thing. He used to go to Florida State from Albany. And there's so many examples of this, but it's just, I don't want to get mad at a kid for, taking that opportunity. As you said, he doesn't have that much more to prove at Drexel. He did it all this year. He was awesome. And Zach Spiker certainly can't complain with the production he got out of Tremaine Isabel. I think when he got that commitment, I think he got what he expected from Isabel's 2 years and 1 year. It was a tremendous season. It's just a real tough thing for me, I guess, just from a loyalty standpoint, more than necessarily a rule change, that, a guy would, commit to a program that gave him a chance when no one else really would, and then leave so quickly as soon as you have a better opportunity. But yeah, it's tough because I don't want to blame the kid. I think, he is acting in his best interest, and that's what college athletics are all about. So, it's a tough one for me to reconcile, and I'm sure I'll get over it. And I think Seton Hall would be a great fit, for instance, because they really need a lead guard. Anthony Nelson is, to me, not ready, from what I've heard, to run a program. They lost Aaron Gordon. They lost Jordan Walker, who apparently the rumors have him headed to Tulane, but we'll see what happens there. Was going to throw out the potential for St. Peter's getting in there. I know Shaheen Holloway has some connections with Patrick School. So that could be something interesting to watch. But Isabel, to me, Seton Hall makes perfect sense, where he could come in, just go get buckets. Him and Miles Powell. For those two guys, there's never been a shot they didn't like, but it would certainly be a fun backcourt to watch play.
Yeah, and they also have Quincy McKnight too, the Sacred Heart transfer, who I think at this point would be the starting point guard. But if you get Isabel, he can kind of move to that 6-man role for a year. Speaking of another guy who could be pigeonholed into a starting point guard role, Matt Mooney, down to 3 schools: Texas Tech, Northwestern, and Creighton. All 3 desperately need him. Creighton is probably the one that's not going to use him at point guard, but he would still be a super extreme focal point in their offense. Both Texas Tech and Northwestern could really use a grad transfer point guard. I've seen Texas Tech kind of mentioned with a few of the top remaining high school prospects, like Isaac LeKelly, the former Fresno State commit. So, I mean, Kevin, maybe your Northwestern Wildcats could grab a big time transfer here.
Yeah, he's kind of all the talk around campus. Well, at least around the small part of campus that really enjoys Northwestern basketball. It's going to be a really interesting decision to watch. I think him not committing over the weekend after he said he was planning on it right after his Texas Tech visit is probably good news for Northwestern, that he didn't commit right after his Texas Tech visit. This is going to sound a little biased. I think Northwestern is the best fit for him. I think he makes the biggest impact at Northwestern. I think his style of play fits best with Chris Collins's offensive system, or at times lack thereof. I think he's a guy who's really good in ball screens. He's a good guy. He's a really good guy catch and shoot, a guy who can both create off the bounce for himself and for others. I think he'd be kind of that perfect combo guard for Northwestern, where he could play the 1, he could play off the ball if Jordan Lathan is ready to go. The highly touted freshman that Chris Collins is coming in at Texas Tech. That defense of style, I'm sure is something fun to play, but I don't necessarily think Mooney necessarily fits it. He's not the longest guy. He's not someone who is overly athletic. I think he'd help Texas Tech, but I think the impact would be biggest at Northwestern. It feels like it's down to Northwestern and Texas Tech, just kind of the buzz. But Creighton is certainly a sleeping giant, and I think would be a nice fit as well. I think it's my gut feel says it's Northwestern, but he's kept things pretty close to vest. We'll see what happens. We'll also throw out the academic card if Matt Mooney is really looking for his for his good grad degree. Northwestern has a pretty good business school, so he could come here. Get great education and great basketball. So shout out to Matt Mooney. Hoping he commits to the Wildcats selfishly, but I think he'd make a good player for all three programs.
Yeah, I think if Zaire Smith came back to Texas Tech, which he's not, he's off to the NBA for good. I think Texas Tech would be the better fit in the sense of they would be the better team. I think Texas Tech with Smith and Mooney is better than Northwestern with Mooney. But now that Smith's gone, I think Northwestern's clearly the best team out of the three. I think Creighton's really going to struggle next year. But there is definitely a spot for someone like a Mooney, a guy like Cremo, who obviously chose to pass up Creighton, but a guy who's going to come in there and have the ball in his hands a lot and take a lot of shots. I mean, their starting point guard last year, Davion Mintz, he's kind of more of like a passive kind of defensive-minded guy. So they really need someone who's a shot creator.
Yeah, I think Mooney would be awesome at Creighton. But I think, going back to Northwestern's fit, he makes just so much sense for their roster. If Northwestern doesn't kind of embrace more of a pace and space system that I'm hoping they will, he can kind of take that similar role what Brian McIntosh did. And McIntosh was a guy who came out of high school as a shooting guard, and Northwestern kind of turned him into a lead guard. He did put up good assist numbers, but was always a guy who looked for his own shot. They'd run tons of little rubs where he could have the ball in his hands. He'd have a screener rolling to the rim and shooters all around, whether it's Vic Law, whether it's A.J. Turner, who's coming in from Boston College, with Miller Kopp, the highly touted wing recruit. Whether it's Anthony Gaines, who struggled with his three-point shot but is very athletic and could develop that shot. And I've talked to a lot of people, from the City Rocks who had him, and from people, who recruited him and are really excited about what Anthony Gaines is going to do at Northwestern over the next couple of years. So, it's such a young group. If you could add a second senior to go along with Ryan Taylor, who I just completely forgot, from Evansville, it would really help that Northwestern team have three seniors along with him, those two, and Derek Parton and Vic Law, so four seniors, and it would be nice. It would be a nice fit all around. Texas Tech, I'm really kind of not sold on them, but at the same time, I'm kind of just on the I trust Chris Beard bandwagon. I think if you're going on coaching, I'd take Chris Beard and Greg McDermott if I'm playing 1 year, trying to get the best coaching over Chris Collins. Collins a great recruiter, but hasn't really shown the player development side. So certainly a lot of different things for Mooney to weigh.
Okay, so I think there's been about 4 other crucial grad transfer commitments. I mean, crucial might be a strong word, but since we last podcasted last week, so in the past week, I think the 4 big ones, in addition to guys like Cremo, are Mike Gilmore is going back to VCU. He was a former top 100 recruit, kind of a stretch 4, stretch 5 type of player. He went VCU, transferred to Florida Gulf Coast. He's now headed back to VCU to fill their hole at center for his final season. We have Trey Campbell going from Georgetown to South Carolina. Campbell has sit out this year from injuries, I think stemmed from a car accident. But South Carolina is not going to be that great, but he should play a pretty big role there, along with Hassani Gravett in the backcourt. Javin White is a 2-year grad transfer from Oral Roberts, who's going to Clemson. So he'll be Elijah Thomas's backup for a year, and then presumably take over that starting position as a senior. And then last but not least, Nat Dixon from UT Chattanooga, considered Penn State, considered Memphis, considered Wake Forest. He's off to SMU.
Yeah, good group put together. I've never been super high on Gilmore. I think he's kind of just been overrated his entire career. But if he gives you 10 to 15 minutes of just energy and athleticism and rebounds, he was efficient this year. Averaged about 6 and 5 in about 18 minutes at Florida Gulf Coast. I think he can help you. He can help an A10 team, especially in a weak A10. The guy that kind of jumps off the page to me is Nat Dixon. He's a guy I think just every club in America would take. Shoots 40% from three. Averaged 14 points a game last season for Chattanooga. He's a real tough kid. He played 37 minutes a game, one of the most used players in the country, just due to the lack of depth that Chattanooga had. He's a guy who I just think helps your ball club, especially a team like SMU who's going to play Jimmy Witt as much as they do, who doesn't really shoot the ball from a smaller guy. To have a guy who can play in that 6-man type role, has good size, going to compete on both ends, going to shoot the three. That's a useful piece.
Yeah, I think the whole thing with Gilmore and VCU about why it's so impactful, it's kind of like the other guys that they had there. I mean, they had Marcus Santos Silva, who's a former top 50 recruit, but didn't play that much as a freshman this year. And they got Corey Douglas, I think is a JUCO transfer. So Gilmore gives them some much needed experience up there. Even if he doesn't light the world on fire, I think it's definitely an upgrade. And then SMU is one of the teams that I'm having a hard time getting a grasp on, like where I think that they're going to finish, if they're an NCAA tournament team or not. They have Isaiah Mike coming in, the Duquesne transfer. They have Jerry Foster's coming back. He declared for the draft, but he's injured, so I don't think he could work out for teams. Their backcourt is kind of strange with Jimmy Witt, as you mentioned before, is a complete non-shooter. And then Jamal McMurray is like an undersized scoring guard. So I'm not really sure what to think about this team.
Yeah, it's weird, and the whole the entire conference is kind of down. So I kind of take that into mind because I think it's a league where you could really just kind of find your way into a top 3 or 4 spot. Just because is Memphis going to be good in year 1 of Penny? I don't know. Is UConn going to be good in year 1 of Danny Hurley? I don't know. There's a lot of teams in rebuilding mode, Wichita State's in rebuild mode. One guy I will point out with SMU real quick, Ethan Chargois. He was a guy who I was pretty high on coming into the season, that not as many people were. Was awesome early in the year, kind of fell off as the team fell off, but had some, the first, I'll try to get the numbers up because I had a great stat earlier. The first, I want to say, 20 games of the year, he was averaging close to, I think, 17 points a game. Something like he was playing 23 minutes a game and averaging 13 points, 6 rebounds, and shooting 46% from 3. He then really cooled off the rest of the way. Only shot 34% total from 3 on the season. He had some really ugly ones. He had a couple over 4s, a 2 for 6. So if he hits the 3, he's going to be a really dangerous kid because he in efficient minutes, he was really putting up numbers last year early in the year.
Yeah, I was someone who in the preseason was very high on Akoya Gao, and that did not work out too well. Chargois definitely got the best of him in the center battle, although Gao did play more of late. I think he was battling injuries, I think was the story throughout his well-traveled career. Moving on to another kind of high potential big man on the transfer market, and that's Sasha Killiea-Jones. He's visiting 3 schools. He's visiting NC State, Pitt, and Wake, and he might visit UNC. So, Kevin, do you have any predictions or any kind of ideas of where Sasha could be headed?
I'm leaning towards Pitt here. I think this is kind of a perfect capable move here. He gets to take a chance on a guy and just let him work. He's so talented. Had some bright moments at Kentucky, just never really fully fit in. I don't know if he's Marcus Lee or if he's a Michael Benajay or some of the or Semi Ojale, guys who've transferred from those top tier schools. It's always tough to kind of read if they're guys who actually are elite players and just didn't get the minutes, or if they just aren't good enough. Are they really just not that good and they were overhyped at high school? So I'll bet on Pitt. The rest of the group seems to be North Carolina area schools: Wake, NC State, UNC, as you mentioned. So it looks like he's headed to the ACC. This would be the kind of perfect crown jewel to the group that's been brought in by Jeff Capel. He's brought in some good talent in the backcourt. Xavier Johnson, former Nebraska commit, as well as Trey McGowan's, who reclassified. They have City and Deer coming in as a grad transfer, visiting. We'll see if that lands in a commitment, but I wouldn't be surprised at all if it did. So they've loaded up in the backcourt. It's always tough this time of year to get bigs. If they could get a sit-out guy like Kalia Jones and see what he can do, that would be a really nice pickup.
So I wonder if potential position is going to come into play, because if he were to go to Pitt, I think he's going to play center. Well, if he goes to UNC or even maybe Wake Forest, Wake I could see him playing the 4 or the 5, but with UNC he would probably be the 4. Looking ahead at UNC's projected 2019 roster, there's a big hole at power forward. Obviously a school like UNC could easily grab like one of or the top power forward on the market in the class of 2019. But as of right now, if Nazir Little is a one and done, which seems likely, they might have to run like Garrison Brooks and Sterling Manley together in the front court. Guys like Brandon Robinson and Rayshawn Black, who are two of their wings, are both very skinny. I think both are like around 180 pounds. So that's a little too slight to play that power forward in the ACC. So maybe depending not only potential playing time but also potential position could be a factor for Sasha.
Yeah, I will say I do agree that it does look early like he'd be a 5 at Pitt, but they are prioritizing in 2019, if we're going to look real far ahead, Kofi Cockburn, a center from the New York City area. So I guess he could be pitching as well. The potential of Cockburn, I believe he's a 4-star recruit, top 50 kid, coming in, playing the 5 right away as kind of a 1-and-done, 2-and-done type recruit. At least would be the goal, along with Kalia Jones at the 4. So that's certainly something to keep an eye on as we monitor the next couple of weeks. Another couple of sit-out transfers that have committed, just to run through these. Braxton Key to UVA. That's a pickup I'm really high on, especially after DeAndre Hunter. Will probably be going after this year to get in the NBA. Teddy Allen to Wichita State, another one I'm pretty high on. I've heard he's kind of a tough kid to coach, but the talent's certainly there. Rodney Chapman, the transfer from Chattanooga, headed to Dayton. Chattanooga's had kind of a mass exodus in year 2. Lamont Paris is doing a good job there. He's recruiting his brains out. It's just losing kids that signed to go play for a different coach is always tough to see. He's headed to Dayton. Anthony Grant is recruiting pretty well. Marcus Card in Minnesota, we touched on a little bit on the show already. Decent pickup. I don't see anything special there. And Seton Hall does lose their 2 backup point guards. We already touched on that as well with the Tremaine Isabel news.
Yeah, I think that Braxton Key is probably the best player in that group. Key had a down season this year. I expected him to be Alabama's second best player coming in. He missed the start of the year with a knee injury. Kind of didn't really fit in all that well when he came back. I think this is a great reclamation project for Tony Bennett, and he should play that DeAndre Hunter role as that kind of small ball 4. And then Dayton adds another guard, but they really need some big men. I mean, looking at their roster, they'll have Josh Cunningham playing that small ball 5 role that he's accustomed to this year, but he's a senior, and they really don't have any other big men. They had a kid sit out with academic ineligibility this year, Obadiah Tobin, who I think is more of a 4, but as of now, he looks like the 5. The Flyers only have, by my quick count, they have 2 scholarships remaining, so they definitely need a big man for this year and a big man for next year. So that'll be something to watch. There is movement potential in the A10. URI's down. St. Louis desperately needs a point guard at this point to be competitive. So teams like Dayton and VCU could climb back up to the top.
Yeah, Dayton's really recruiting in the we're going to just load up with athletes who can go get buckets and just kind of see what happens. which is probably the right move with Anthony Grant because I don't think he's necessarily a very good game coach. So we'll really see what happens there. I'm pretty excited to watch this team's progression because some Dayton fans are like jumping off a cliff. Anthony Grant sucks. Others are like the dude's just going to recruit and he just needs to go get his plus players. He's brought in a Dwayne Cohill. He brought in Ibby Watson, who's going to sit out this year from Michigan. He's got from Long Island Lutheran, he's got a kid, Frankie Policelli, who's athletic, a kind of a combo 3-4. He could shoot it. So he's loading up his roster with the athletes he wants. I still think he needs that one more, certainly a big, and I think he also needs one more kind of star material type player. I know they were in on Anthony Simons before he decided to go to the NBA draft out of high school. That'll be something interesting to monitor as well. But Dayton is, I think, on the right track recruiting wise. The question is, will that translate to wins? It did when Anthony Grant was at VCU. It did not when it was at Alabama. We'll see how that manages at the kind of in-between level of Dayton where expectations are so high. If this is a down year all of a sudden, I think there's going to be a lot of fans who start to flip on him, and that's dangerous.
I think sticking with the A10, I saw that you had tweeted about this yesterday, I think. Duquesne took a center named James Ellis, who I had never heard of, but I guess the reason being is he's not going to be eligible this season. But taking these academically ineligible guys who are going to sit that first year is actually kind of an underutilized strategy. I know Arizona State got great results doing that with Romello White, and obviously Villanova with Omari Spellman. So it's almost like getting a transfer if that the player is really competent in will definitely help you, but you can kind of buy low on him because he can't play right away. Similar to LJ Figueroa too, who ended up going from New Mexico State to junior college and now is going to St. John's. So I think it's kind of an underutilized strategy, and I appreciate Duquesne, doing everything that they can to mine talent.
Duquesne's going to be interesting because Keith Dambrot is just kind of throwing kind of lottery tickets at things and seeing what sticks. He'll have 2 scholarship players back next season who played in games this season, Mike Lewis and Eric Williams, 2 really, really good players. And then he'll add, I believe, the 4 guys who sat out last season as transfers: Craig Randall from Memphis, Tavian Dunn-Martin from Akron, Frankie Hughes, who is, I think, the biggest coup, a 7-point-a-game guy at Mizzou, Marcus Weathers, 9 and 6 as a freshman at Miami of Ohio, and Michael Hughes, who is not related to Frankie, who is a big man transfer from Akron as well, followed Dambrot. And then he has 7 commits for next season, not even counting the big guy you just mentioned. They have Sincere Carey, Brandon Wade, and Lamar Norman. Lamar Norman, the best name in that group of guards. Norman had a Butler offer, was originally committed to UTEP before the coaching change. He's a talented kid. I really like that pickup. I think he's going to play real well in that league. And then 4 big guys minus the kid, James Ellis. They have Gavin Bizot, who's a stretch 4, who's really highly rated by ESPN and not really highly rated by any other scouting service. Austin Retroff, who is also signed, an Ohio kid, who, that's where Keith Dambrot's made his living, is Ohio kids, recruiting those kids. Amari Kelly, a Georgia kid who's pretty athletic, a big guy. And then Dylan Swingle, who is a big drink of water at about, I think, 6'10", about 300 pounds, was trending towards West Virginia, and then Dambrot swooped in and sealed the deal with him. So he's recruiting a lot of dudes. They're going to be young, they're going to be inexperienced next year, but they're going to have some pieces, and it'll be fun to watch the next couple of years him turn Duquesne into a basketball power. And that is the end of my rant about Duquesne basketball.
I mean, there is definitely, I kind of mentioned this before, but there is potential to move up in the A10. And I think adding transfers, especially at a school like Duquesne that has not been successful for a while, is definitely the right move. I don't know what's going on with this roster. They have 16 guys right now. Something's got to give. But nonetheless, definitely a good move for Duquesne. Also, wanted to mention one of the biggest recruit decisions from the last time that we podcast. Brandon Williams to Arizona, former Arizona commit that reopened his recruitment with the whole FBI stuff. Considered Oregon and Gonzaga, ends up going back to Arizona, where he should split the point guard position with Justin Coleman this year before taking it over as a sophomore. Were you surprised at all, Kevin, by that selection?
I was a little surprised. I certainly wasn't stunned. I felt like there was kind of momentum towards it. I had really been hoping for Gonzaga. I just don't think it was ever really going to happen. So I guess that's a little unfortunate, but it was a good pickup for sure from Arizona. They really needed him because I don't think Justin Coleman is the answer and savior that every Arizona fan tweeted he was several days before. So we'll kind of see what happens there. Williams is a good player, also not a transcendent type talent, but a very good recruit and a big one for Arizona, who's kind of steadied the ships after what was a bit of a few nervy weeks where we weren't sure what they were going to look like next year.
Okay, and then I guess we could touch on some of the recent NBA news that's like been trickling out. We'll see more consistent news after the combine and closer to the May 30th deadline. But Jerome Robinson is gone. That happened a couple weeks ago, but I don't think that we touched on it yet on the podcast. Just kills any momentum that Boston College had. And then Kaiser Gates is also gone from Xavier. He was a backup power forward. He's not very good. He can shoot a little bit, solid defender. Was recruited over when they got Ryan Wheelodge. But just like a really, really puzzling decision here. A lot of people say, well, the kid just wants to make money. Like, let him go make money. I'm not sure if he's going to make any money. Like, I don't think he's even a D-League player. So I'm not really sure what was gained here.
Yeah, Gates was a puzzler. Don't want to criticize the kid too much. If he wants to go overseas and make good living, all the power to him. Would I have recommended he stay one more year where he had a year where he could have actually improved his draft stock considerably with guys not being there anymore? Yeah, I think I would have stayed another year. But if you think you're a pro prospect and you want to go play pro, who am I to say otherwise? Otherwise, I will be roasted on Twitter by the same people who spend their entire days waiting for Jeff Goodman or John Rothstein to tweet anything about player mobility. So all the power to you, Kaiser Gates. That's all I'll say. Jerry Foster at SMU. We touched on that one just a little bit ago. That's a really big one. And everyone back at Mississippi State. That's kind of trickled out through the last few weeks. So good chance for us to touch on Mississippi State before we wrap up the show. Brad, I'm pretty excited about this club. I think they got a lot of talent.
Yeah, I think that they're borderline top 10 right now. A lot of people were, I wouldn't say like overly concerned, but I definitely saw one article that was like, is Mississippi State going to be okay without Eli Wright and Xavier Stapleton? And of course they are. I mean, they have all 5 starters back. The Witherspoon brothers, at the guard spot, along with Lamar Peters, who was a bit of a disappointment this year, but will be back as a junior, and he's a very talented player. They have a great front court with Eric Holman and Abdul Adu. Holman's kind of a stretch 4, stretch 5 type of player. Adu's more of like a traditional center. They had a 5-star recruit to the front court with Reggie Perry. I've heard great things about the other 2 recruits that they're bringing in, Robert Woodard and DJ Stewart, who are both top 100 recruits in the wing. So this roster is deep. It's talented. I mean, it really has it all. It's very tough not to like this team.
Yeah, I think you summed it up pretty well. I'm intrigued by the talent. I want to see how it all develops because I'm always hesitant to be like, oh, they bring everybody back, and all of a sudden this goes from NIT to top 10. But as you mentioned, the recruits really have a chance to do something special. Perry gives them something at the front court they didn't really have. One more quick recruiting note on Mississippi State. They do have a sit 1, play 3 transfer, Siena transfer, Prince Oduro. He visited last week. I would guess they're the favorite for his services, them or South Florida, who he's officially visiting now. He was basically tampered with by Ben Howland last year in March after Prince was under a letter of intent. He went up to his prep school coach and said, I would offer this kid to start the starting job at center next year if he wasn't signed already. And then South Florida has one of his best friends from prep school on the team, David Collins, who had a nice year. We'll touch on him in the podcast. I think is when we do a breakout episode at some point because he's going to be really good. So either way, Oduro is a talented big man transfer to keep an eye on that for whatever reason came to my mind when you discussed Mississippi State. So I figured I'd throw him in our podcast that has really just been a whip around of every single player you could possibly want to know about.
Yeah, I don't think that he should go to Mississippi State because Adu is a sophomore, and they got Jethro Shmumpa, who used to play for Arizona State, who was a top 100 recruit. So there's really not a ton of minutes there. And then I know one of the other schools was Seton Hall, but they're also getting a visit from Ike Obiagu, and Obiagu, I think, is the superior player. And so maybe he does end up at South Florida with his friend there, David Collins. Did you also want to mention the U18 pool of players?
Yeah, we can touch on it a little bit. I didn't do too much of a dive on it. I saw Joe Girard is involved, which is interesting, just as a guy I've followed since he was about in 8th grade. So that'll be interesting to monitor. I hope he gets a chance because he's a fun kid to watch. I think he's been overhyped. I'm going to be completely honest. As a recruit, I don't necessarily think he's a Duke-type player. I'm excited to see Cole Anthony potentially, Armando Bacot, who VCU fans have been salivating over for years. Joey Baker got an invite. He could be interesting to watch. He was listed in height on this group at 6'8", 230, which that was like the biggest takeaway I took away was that Joey Baker is 6'8", 230, and he's going to come in and play like the 3 for Duke, like the 2 or the 3 and just shoot. That's some dangerous size, man.
Yeah, the link I had is just paragraph form listing the players, so there's no heights or anything. I think the two true locks to make this team are Quentin Grimes, because Bill Self is the coach, and Zion Williamson. And then obviously I think Cole Anthony's pretty safe. I think Joey Baker's pretty safe. Tyrese Maxey, who just committed to Kentucky a few days ago. And then you have some pretty interesting younger guys like 2019 or even 2020. Guys like Scotty Lewis and Brian Antoine and Josiah James. And then there is one player who is a rising sophomore in this group, and that's Musa Jallow, who was a rotation player for Ohio State and should be a starter for them this year. So I think he'll make the team because of his age. A couple other players worth noting, Taylor Horton-Tucker and Ayo Dezunmu. They were like from rival AAU teams, and supposedly the story behind that was they both wanted to go to Illinois, but they both refused to play with each other. So the staff was forced to choose between the two from their handlers, and obviously went with Ayo Dezunmu, which slid Taylor Horton-Tucker to Iowa State. Not sure if that's 100% truth, but that's at least a story that was out there last fall.
Yep, and that was a really weird story, and it kind of taught me a lot about the game. And I've talked to some Chicago basketball people. They say it's pretty much the truth, and that's kind of how AAU works. And Brad Underwood had a big decision to make because he could not alienate Mac Irvin Fire on that AAU program, and he would have done that by taking THT and then probably losing Io. So that'll be an interesting little scenario to watch. I'm looking forward to monitoring Matthew Wahert and Pat McCaffrey, two guys who play for D1MN in AAU. I'm hoping to get out to about an hour west of Evanston, Elgin, Illinois. They call it a Chicago event. There's a Adidas Gauntlet Regional. Those two guys are on a team, D1MN, who should be at the tournament. So hoping to see those two guys, two of the better recruits in the country. Pat McCaffrey I played Little League baseball with when his dad was the coach at Siena. So some throwback memories of him. Cool to see him in a position to play Division I basketball and high level USA type basketball in his future.
Well, that's a very cool story there.
Yes, it's quite the connection. I played Little League baseball with the McCaffreys. I was remember spending time at a summer camp with Patrick, then being really sad when I found out he had cancer because he had moved away, and then he got cancer when he was 13. There was that one year where I was playing in the first four, and it was a big storyline. but he is doing well now. He is hooping. One of the elite recruits in the country. So yeah, those are my capital region of New York basketball connections. The McCaffreys, I knew by connection the Herder family. I think Kevin's going to go to the draft. By the way, I think that's just kind of a gut feel. I think he's going to go to. I think if he goes in, he'll be a first rounder. So we'll see what he does. Stay in the draft.
Yeah, I've been very high on Kevin Herter since watching him last season, and then when he made the U19 team, I was 100% all in that he was a future NBA player. I think also just wanted to mention, because I'm sure someone would bring it up if we didn't mention it. Kevin Porter is another lock for this U18 team. He's someone who was like a top 50 recruit, signed to USC, has since blown up, and is now a top 20 recruit in most places. I think he is probably one of the 5 or 6 most likely players to make this, and I know someone would bring that up if we fail to mention him.
Yeah, Porter's a talent. I know he had a huge hoop summit. He wasn't actually invited, but he was coming on like the alternate team that comes and practices against him. And then just like everyone was like, how is this guy not invited? He's the best player on the floor. So he's going to be a fun one to watch. Should be an interesting USA basketball group to monitor and see how they fare. I had a lot of fun watching the U19 groups. I was actually more focused on the Canada team because I thought between Lindell Wigington, RJ Barrett, some mid-major guys like Amadou Bamba, who's at Coastal Carolina, Prince Oduro, who I mentioned is at Siena, or now transferring from Siena. They had Abu Kajab from who was headed to Oregon. There was a lot of D1 guys that I really wanted to monitor. So I watched a lot of Canada. I watched a couple of the other guys who were going to go D1. I watched a little New Zealand last year. So that was a good little summer basketball thing to monitor. So hopefully the U18s have some similar excitement in store.
Yeah, I remember being very impressed with Abu Kajab, watching the U19s last year. He didn't really pan out as a freshman for Oregon, but I mean, definitely would not give up on him. He could definitely make an impact this year. And I can't wait to see this group of U19 players, which will probably feature more college guys. I know last year they had Austin Wiley, who had a big year. They had Kevin Herter. They had a bunch of freshmen, but it was mostly defined by a lot of incoming freshmen. I meant like Emmanuel Quickly and Romeo Langford. But the season was defined by USA not winning the gold and falling to Canada.
That Canada team was good though. That was a fun group to watch. I'm certainly looking forward to seeing some of those guys hit the college ranks. Wigington was so good this year at Iowa State, and Barrett will hit the ranks this year with Duke. Anything more you wanted to touch on, Brad? We've hit everything I could possibly imagine on this show. I can't believe it was only an hour ago we were breaking down Nevada. It's been a fun one, man.
Yeah, I mean we pretty much hit every single thing that you could conceivably talk about over the past week. I mean, maybe I could mention too that Saint Bonaventure got a sit 1 play 3 kid from Mount St. Mary's who only averaged 6 points a game. So that was kind of a interesting talking point on Twitter I saw yesterday.
Yeah, he can shoot it. I don't know if he's going to do anything else, but he can shoot it. We're going to throw out some more little mid-major recruiting news. Jamion Christian does get his first commit at Siena. He gets a City Rock. Jalen Pickett. That's a recruit that I'm pretty excited about. So that should be a fun group to watch. And there's so much recruiting still to do, so many transfers still to watch. And we'll be bringing you all of that coverage just like this throughout the rest of the offseason. Thanks so much for listening, everybody. It was a fun one. I hope you all have a great week. Enjoy your summery weather, hopefully, wherever you are located, and have a great night.